Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 34th edition of Native Paranormal Crossroads. The Paranormal Rangers being Michelle Miners, Jonathan Dover, and Stan Milford, who can't be with us tonight because Stan is doing some more book work. I was going to say he's doing a podcast for his book that's been released called The Paranormal Ranger. And Dale and I keep saying we must actually get Stan on his own show talking about his book too. So I'm also with my co-host Dale Tobin from Symmetry of Health. I'm Laura Massey from Two Feathers Medicine, and we're really delighted to welcome back to the show Deborah Hatswell. Now, many of you, especially if you're viewing in the UK, will know Debbie. Debbie has a YouTube channel called BBR Investigations that looks at anything paranormal, and she's been doing this research for a while. She has some incredible stories, sightings. She has a lot of correspondence with the public who are also keep her very up to date with lots of weird happenings and unexplained things. So Debbie, tell us a little bit about yourselves for people who haven't met you on the show or don't know you, and also maybe go into some of your latest projects.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm a grandmother. I live in the northwest of England, just in the West Pennines. Had an ordinary life, but always had strange or paranormal things happening around me. Grandmother was the same, as was my mum and my dad. So it's kind of normal for me. I was brought up with that, but there was always a shame attached to it. So it wasn't something you talked about outside of the house. When I was 15, I lived in an ordinary mill town. I saw one day with my friend, I was at this old mansion house, and this thing leant out of the bushes and looked at me. And he looked like a man and an ape had been pushed together somehow. It was absolutely terrifying. And in all honesty, I pushed her to the ground and I ran away kicking and screaming. That was in 1982. And back then there was nowhere I could go to talk to somebody about it. It was absolutely terrifying. And I had to go back the next day because it was my school. And I still had a year in school to do. I was only in the fourth year. And it had a profound effect, I would say, on my mental health. And I did the usual thing that you do when there's trauma attached with something. And I did everything I could to run away from it. And it was only on meeting my husband now that I realised that I can keep running and I can keep trying to avoid it, but it's there and I'm going to have to deal with it. And I'd secretly been looking for other witnesses since 1982 when it happened, but I would have been about 36 at the time when I publicly said, right, I'm going to put my head above the parapet, and if they don't believe me, they don't believe me, I don't care, but there's got to be somebody else out there who recognises what I've seen. There's got to be another person in the UK, because back then, guys, there was no history of Bigfoot. I didn't live in America or Canada or, British Columbia. There was nothing. There was maybe Tales of the Abominable Snowman with Derek Nimoy or something like that. Or Arthur C. Clarke, I think, at the time, did the Yeti and the Bhutan Wildman, but nothing in the UK at all. So I thought I was either crazy or he had to be something. And I've been searching for that something ever since. So when people say I'm a Bigfoot researcher, I'm not the type of person that's out with tech trying to get DNA or capture videos. My interest is in the witness stories. Because in the UK, we do have a history of a hairy wild man. Just like the native people of America, it's there in our history, it's just hidden from us. The Woodwose has been in our history since the first century, since people in the UK started to mouth oral tradition. And when the Romans come and the Gauls and the Anglo-Saxons, all of that was forbidden. It was seen, the same reason that they burnt our ancestors for being witches. Anything that empowered other men was seen as frightening, and it was shut down. And it took away our strength, it took away our confidence, it took away our heritage, our culture, our knowing. And part of that knowing is what we class as the paranormal or the supernatural is completely natural to us human beings. 100% completely natural. It's society that tells us it's abnormal. Society is the world's biggest cult. And the way that you get people to do what you want to control is to use fear and to take away any strength or confidence in your opponent. So we've gone from being this culture where gender didn't matter. What you were good at was what you did. So you was a confident human being. You had a good sense of strength, of self. You knew where your roots had come from. You knew the stories of your ancestors. And that was kind of, when that got took away, we're left with this society where people are still tuning in and doctors are saying, no, there's something wrong with you. You need to take that pill. You know, children are saying, I don't like that man. And we're saying, no, go and sit on his knee, that's Uncle Arthur. Go on, go and give him a kiss. That kid knows what Uncle Arthur is inside. We are the only being on this planet that disregards its natural instinct. No other animal on this planet does that. And society taught us to poo-poo that away. So I've gone from that to, I do more, I wouldn't say counselling. I wouldn't say I do counselling. I listen to people's stories. And I'll tell you why I listen. I interviewed a lady a very long time ago who lived in Ireland. Her name was Una. And she had an experience where she had to swerve the car to avoid four little fairy men who had run out across the road. And she was an incredibly religious lady. She'd never drunk in her life, never smoked a cigarette, never told a lie. And she didn't want that story to go into obscurity. She wanted it to be handed down verbally. And that's why I started doing what I do. And yesterday, I spoke to a man in his 70s who had an experience in his 30s. And yesterday was the first time that he'd shared that with anybody, other than probably his ex who was with him at the time and his current partner who he's with now. She's enabled him to say, come on, it's time. And he's like, yeah, I want my truth out there. You know, I really want to know. So the story that he's told me, I would imagine people will find very far-fetched. But in the UK, like the rest of the world, we see with one set of eyes all of the buildings and the roads and the urbanness, and we forget that earth has a soul below it. And that soul is continuously there. Around from about the Bronze Age, right through medieval periods, we did destroy that land. There was a lot of mineral deposits there and iron. And I think in that disturbance, something was awaked. So he didn't tell me that the cottage was haunted or anything like that until I'd started. I like to go in blind. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want any information when I go in. I want to just hear their story and then something will click in and I'll start writing it down. I can share it with you if you want, but it's a little bit long-winded and I don't want to take up all of the panel.
Go ahead.
No, it's great to have. That's why we've got you on. Yeah. You've got all these new stories.
You're a great storyteller.
We've got a gentleman called Tom who lives in Sussex in a place called, at the time, Hale Green. And he lived in a house called Hale Green Cottage, which is what do they call it? Is it listed? Well, you can't,
listed
can't do
building.
Building. So it's a very, very, very going back to like 13th, 14th century kind of cottage. And he said that he couldn't understand why he got it to rent so easily in the first place, because it was absolutely beautiful. It was at the top of the valley. There was no other homes around. The village was about 3 miles down the road. And he said about the field just dropped at a slope, about a gentle slope for about a quarter of a mile, and there was a stream at the bottom. And he was incredibly puzzled why it hadn't been snapped up. And he said he walked in and he kind of knew that there was old residents there, let's put it that way. But nothing frightening. And that's what he said. Nothing ever scary. And then he himself said, but I will tell you about that later on. He was so keen to get this experience off his chest that's what he did. So I let him go with that. I thought, just let him talk. And that's what I did. He said it was probably around 1982. So a similar time to myself. It was early summer and it was really hot. It was about 1 a.m. in the morning. And in the UK, we don't have air conditioning. So you just have to leave your windows wide open. Even if there's marauding murderers at large, you just open your window, don't you, Laura? That's what you do. And he said that's what they were doing. They were in bed, the windows were wide open, and they heard what they said at first sounded like a girl screaming, "Help me, help me." So you're in the middle of nowhere, there's no lights out there. And he's thinking she's either been attacked walking home down the lane and someone's attacking her in the woodland, or she's been kicked out of a car after being attacked. So he said, panic's going on then, and fear. I've got no clothes on. He said, I've run to the bedroom window and I can't see anything. There's nothing out there, but you can hear this screaming. He said, and as I'm deciding what to do, that scream turned and it started to sound like cats fighting or snarling. So then he's thinking, oh, it's just an animal. It's just an animal. And he said, I'm kind of stopping the panic at that point and thinking, you know, silly me, why have I got myself all worked up about this? He said, and as I'm thinking that, it changed again. He said, and it was a visible, help me, help me. So he asked his ex-partner who was with at the time, did you hear that? And she said, yeah, that's a girl and she's screaming for help. So he said, right, I'm going to get my shotgun and I'm going to go out to the lane. He said, and I didn't think about putting clothes on or anything like that. He said, and as I have that thought, I see from the bushes in the garden these things. And it's a hornbeam hedge, a living hedge that's been left. So it's about 30 foot high and all the trees are intermingled in, you know, the type of thing, loads of blackberries, all of that. Kind of the exact same place kind of where I saw my creature. And he said they came out of the hedge and all of this happened in split seconds. And what you're getting is an hour and a half's interview in 5 minutes, if you get what I mean. So he said at that point, I thought, I need my fucking gun. So he ran and he grabbed his gun. And he said, I'm thinking, I'm seeing things. I'm absolutely seeing things. So rather than run back into the house, he runs out the front door and round to the side gate and looks through. And as he looks through, they are definitely there. And he said they were wandering around the garden up on two legs. They were about 4 to 5 feet in height, completely hair covered, decent muscle culture, but also looked emancipated in some way, was his exact words. He said they had an almost ape-like face, very thick, muscular thighs, and arms that were long down to the thing. And he said, that's an ape. That's an ape or a monkey. He said, but they weren't anything of this world. And they continued to sniff around the garden as if they were searching for something. And he said, to his horror, one of them started making its way to the door. And he said, at that moment, I realised that my ex is hanging out the window watching them. He said, and this thing sniffed and looked up. So they kind of interlocked eyes. He said, and it was at that moment that one of the others spotted him. And he said, I don't know why I did this, but I started to make a massive amount of noise. I picked the gun up and I just started screaming and roaring, and they panicked. They didn't run at him. They were scared of him. He said they all turned tail at once and ran, and they just jumped into the hornbeam. And he said you could see them running down the field to the stream below, and they just vanished. They were just gone. And he said, I don't remember talking about it with her, and she didn't talk to me about it. We both kind of caught our breath. And the next thing he remembers is waking up in the morning. And he said it was very serendipitous because he had a friend that turned up there that morning really early, was going to help him with the job. He said, and as he pulled in on his motorbike, I couldn't get the story out quick enough. He said, and then I seen his face change as if to say, yeah. And he said, look, just to confirm it, just come round the back with me. And I forgot to mention two things. He said with them was an horrendous stench, like nothing. He said it hung in the air, it stunk awful. And they must have been physical in some way because the branches and the trees were snapping and they were physically snapping them as they were going through them. And he said there was actual evidence of that in the back garden. It looked like something had been, he said, I'm not a gardener. It was incredibly overgrown. And it looked like something had wandered through the garden looking for something. In the hornbeam hedge, there was broken pieces. You could see where they'd run through the field. And his friend just wouldn't believe him. And that shut him down. That friend going, was it. He shut him down. So from being in his early 30s to now being in his early 70s, yesterday was the first time that he voiced all of this, you know. And it came out like a flood, Laura. It wasn't, I didn't have to prompt him in any way. I just sat and I just let him talk, and it just all came out. He went into minute detail and description of what they looked like. And it was the way they moved. He kept saying they didn't move. They were bounding or leaping, almost like a wallaby or a kangaroo would do. And I asked him to describe if there was anything he could think of that it could be. And he said, no, but the thighs, the legs kind of reminded me of a fawn or a satyr, like Pan. But it didn't have hooves. It had definite feet. But it had this thick, muscular build to its thighs. So my next thing will be looking at that piece of land, and I've only just, because as I'm typing it out, I've had the interview, so I can remember what you said. But when you're typing it out, you pick up far more detail.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually like audio typing, so as he's speaking, I'm typing it out and I pick up more detail. I asked him about the cottage and what he meant when he said that when he first moved in, a lot of stuff had happened there. And he said, right, I come to find out after moving in there that it's really well known in the area because there's a lot of paranormal activity that goes on there. He said, and when we live there, random people would just turn up and say, like, can we come and do a ghost investigation at your house? He said, and in the end, I just got used to it. He said, and it happened so normally that it became the norm for them for paranormal activity to happen. So he said one day, it's about 10 p.m, summer. He's got his friends round and they're in the conservatory or whatever. He didn't say conservatory, that's me just exaggerating. And they're having a laugh and a joke and whatever. And the door goes and it's this professor expert of the psychologist department of wherever, with a bunch of students who's decided he's come to go and put an end to all of this nonsense. And he did say to me that he felt that the activity happening at the house was of a very... And night, he said it was lovely. That was his words. It was lovely to be around that energy. But if you said that you didn't believe in it, then something would intrinsically happen. And this professor has come in and said, right, I'm going to test all of this. So he's looking for wires and hidden cameras and all of that. And he said, this is absolute stuff and nonsense. And I'm sure we'll have this over and done within 10 minutes. And Tom said to him, look, mate, stop saying that. Because something's going to happen if you carry on. You're being really disrespectful. He said, and at that point, a book just flew off the bookshelf and hit him in the head. So, yeah. So he's saying, you've rigged this up. This is that. This is that. He said it didn't change his unpoliteness in any way. It made him even more skeptical. And Tom said, as I'm about to say to him, look, mate, you're really not understanding. Another book. Right in the head. He said, and he left in an absolute temper, convinced that they'd rigged it up. But A, he didn't know they were going to turn up there. And B, I'm quite sure that the other members in the room would have seen any wires or any activity. So it's almost like, I said to him, it feels like some old cantankerous old sod who's like, what do you mean you don't believe in me? This is mine. Yeah, that's what I got the feeling. He said it is like, but there was 3 or 4 occasions where something very dark had come through, and I hadn't got to that part in the transcript yet. Just really, really dark energies. And I think he just used his will. It was just, no, a boundary is drawn, you will not. And one thing I forgot to mention, this account happened at 1 a.m. I asked him what kind of activity happened. And he said, oh, all of the normal, bangs, knocks, the whole 9 yards, people touching your shoulder, that kind of thing. But every night before I go to sleep, it sounds like something's got a metal tin with metal ball bearings in it. And they shake it in my ear and I immediately go to sleep. And I said, does that happen every night? And he went, yeah, every night. Wow. That is somebody being put to sleep.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
And the connotation that comes with that, I didn't say it to him, but what if this isn't the only time those things have been in that garden?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this could go back to, does he know anything about the previous occupants?
Right, that's what I said, Laura. Tell me about the previous occupants then. So the ones who'd lived in it before him, he said the turnover is like this. Nobody will stay in it.
Yeah.
There was one guy who loved it, absolutely loved it. And he said, I don't know if he was a king, Deb, but he was definitely important to the travellers because they still come year after year to pay heedance to him. And on the day that he died, they walked from miles and miles and miles to the house. And they put him in his favourite chair and they carried him and they walked the entire boundary of the area. And when they got back to the cottage, he was no longer in the chair. And they just taken him. I can feel the hairs on my arms going. They'd taken him to the resting place that he'd chosen. And he never had a minute's trouble in that house. And I think as he understood, he was a traveller, he was a Romaner. He understood the connection between man and earth.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and everything was fine for him. And it was when he left that I think there's been activity and people have put the negative on it straight away, and it's fed and built upon that.
It is fed from that, yeah, because it was beginning to sound, Jonathan, it was beginning to sound a bit like a mini UK Skinwalker Ranch for a moment.
The UK is a Skinwalker. You don't need to, it doesn't matter where you are, you can throw a dart at a map of the UK and there are cases like this. And this is the thing, they're being lost because we don't know them. People don't know them. So unless they know my channel or, you know, this actual person, they don't know these stories. So I was able to tell him that there are a number of reports around him about the Sussex leaping creature, a dark creature covered in hair that people see leaping from one side of the road to the other, or from one woodland to another. Is that the same as what he's seen? You know?
Did you say Sussex?
Yeah.
Leaping, yeah, because that's where I am.
Hale Green, Sussex.
I'm in West Sussex. I'm in West Sussex.
So it's actually called Hale. I think it's Hale Cottage, Hale Green, Chiddingly.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, Chiddingly, Lewes, that kind of area there, down there.
Yes. Yeah, I'll have a quick look. That is quite, what an incredible story from that guy, and you've not finished it yet.
No, and I think most people will instantly go to, how could 8 flesh and blood creatures come through? What if they're not flesh and blood? That could be a paranormal event, a supernatural event. He's not scared of what's happening around him. He's accepted the outer world, the quantum world. He understands all of that and he accepts it openly. They were scared of him. They were frightened when they saw him. He said he clearly saw panic within their faces. Yeah. So he wasn't meant to see them, was he?
No.
So maybe that night, that shaking in the air didn't work.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I can't understand. For me, the shaking of the tin reminds me of when I was a little kid in my bedroom, and that thing would teach me how to, anything that scared me, it kind of taught me to shrink it down into a little black ball and throw it away.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it as a child, but now looking back, I was being trained because that's what I did go into really negative situations. In my mind, I can shrink them right down.
Yeah.
And look at them in singular moments. I don't know how to explain that to anybody. You guys will probably understand because you're sensitive yourselves. It happens for each of us, doesn't it? But I think Tom has maybe been trained as a child because of what I'll get into next with him. Because I said to him, I'll just put you in next Monday for 3:00 and we'll talk about your early experiences. Start me from the first one that you can remember and we'll work our way through. And I'm sure I'll see the pattern there because there will be a pattern.
There's patterns. Yeah. I was just going to ask Michelle and Jonathan here about whether there's been anything sort of similar. I mean, I know we've had Judy on before, Michelle, who's talked similar things, but not quite the same as this.
One of the things that strike me is that this sound that he hears, it's almost as if there's a suggestion that's put in his brain that when that sound appears, kind of like a post-hypnotic suggestion,
right,
that you immediately do that. I myself have experienced something similar with a different sound. When I stay up late, and I'm a night person, But when it gets around to around 3 a.m. and my I will hear a sound that's almost like inside my head,
Mm.
and it the nearest I can describe it is like this, like that, and I know that when I hear that, it's time to put down whatever I'm doing. It's time to crawl into bed and go to sleep. And I've always thought, is that my brain just shutting down after a long day? It's uh, I don't know what it is, but it's happened pretty much all my life. And and then it's just like I know it's time to go to sleep.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's happened to me, and I've had a lot of very unusual experiences over a lot of years. So it doesn't surprise me,
Mm.
and I've just learned to live with it.
Mm.
So that's one of the things that. And then the other thing is that when me and Stan were doing the investigations, a lot of people that we spoke to were unable to relate their stories. We talked to one lady that was, she must have been close to 90,
Mm.
and she came to a conference, um, uh, elderly Native woman, and she had her kids, her grandkids, her great grandkids all around her. And she came up to us afterwards and gave us a big hug, and there were tears running down her face. And she related stories about growing up when she was a little girl, and her family, their all their jaws about hit the floor because she had never told anyone in her own family these
Mm.
stories, and that emotion was so built up in her, and she just thanked us for speaking the way we were because it helped her realize that she wasn't crazy.
Yeah, that's why I do what I do. I've got no money. I'm as poor as a church mouse. But every week I see somebody come back to life again because their experiences have not only been validated, but they've then found a community of other people who felt like that in the past. So even if they haven't had the same experience, they can recognize that being out there alone, you know. And there's a lot of cases where people, it's almost like they have forgotten, or it's been pushed so far down in the psyche, but then they will watch something or smell something or hear something. It's normally a sense that brings it forward. And this memory then comes. So I get a lot of cases like that where people say, you won't believe me because, yeah. And well, I'm not judge and jury. My experience was impossible. So I probably will believe you. Because by the time people have come to me, they've tried everything else.
Yeah.
You know, they've
And
literally tried everything else at the wit's end.
You know,
as well,
Deborah, I have gone through similar things myself when I first started on the Skinwalker Ranch and having these experiences, to which Jonathan has alluded to. Uh, and then hearing disembodied, we call them disembodied voices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the terms have been related to. You start to think in your mind, am I going crazy? And then you start to think, okay, what is going on here? And you start to hear these whispers, and and schizophrenia is
Yeah.
is something that people can be diagnosed for. And then people start to think, well, I had this experience and I heard this voice and it told me to do this and that. That, clinically, somebody could come back and observe and say, she's really lost her mind. And then you start to believe, wow, maybe I am losing my mind, and seeing these experiences out in the field or seeing things. It took me a long time to understand that I wasn't the only one, and I felt alone. I
Yeah.
felt alone, and there are individuals that I've interviewed. Some have gotten to the point of almost suicide.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's a really interesting experience when you're thinking, why am I having this, and what is this all about, when you haven't had it
Got
before.
with me. What's wrong with me was why me?
Exactly.
What's wrong with me? That's what I used to say to myself all the time. It must be something I'm doing that's causing this. I've had every doctor's. I don't think I've ever had a doctor who's ever took me seriously without writing a prescription for a drug that I've just threw in the bin as I've walked out. Because there's not a pill in the world that's going to take it away, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
And I just felt like I had no strength. I'd had that taken from me. My word, my honesty was taken from me. People viewed me in a very different light. They looked at me in a different way than before. So all of that, and there's a class system in the UK. So you've got the aristocracy, and you've got the middle class, and you've got the working class, and you've got traveller families. And once you've hit all of them and you're down at the bottom, people don't believe what you say anyway. But so it's I had to fight against that. And that's what the Guardian article was about, was that 20 years ago, you couldn't even get a story in the newspaper. But because so many people have come forward and said, no, actually, this happened to me. I am a working class man. I do work on a building site, a construction site. I work probably 60, 70 hours a week. And when I was driving home, this happened to me. And I've got to drive that way tomorrow. Nobody's interested in that story. They're not, they'll come in and they'll interview him and they'll go. So what I'll do is I'll spend the next however long it is on the phone to him while he's driving, and I'll say, right, well, let's look at an alternative route for the next few nights or so. Let's look at an alternative route until you're comfortable enough to drive on that road again. I would suggest driving on that road in the daytime. Drive as far onto it as you can, and if you've got to back out, that's fine. Still a win. You've attempted it. So I kind of work like that, me, with them, and try and get them. Can I give you an example? Make it easy for me. I'll give you.
Sure.
There's a place called Swannington in England. Beautiful. It's Grace Dew Priory. So there's an old nunnery, a very old priory building that's on there, and people have seen walking figures for hundreds of years crossing there, and up to very modern times. So it was only about 2015, 2016. And it's very rural. So when you're on the road, I think in America call them passing places. We would call them little pull-ins. You'd every now and again along the lane, there'd be a little pull-in, so you could pull in and the car can come past you and then you can go. So you can't have two cars on the road at the same time. So sister's driving, she's in the front seat, 10 o'clock at night, February, so very, very dark and cold. Two dogs in the back, they're going for a walk, that's what they're doing. She said, as we're driving along the lane, it's really dark, you can only just see where your headlights are. A man comes walking across the road with three dogs on leashes and goes into the woodland. She said, so we pulled over for him to do that. And as he went in, something moved across the road ahead of him. She said, so we drive up thinking it's going to be like a deer or something like that. And it's this thing. She said, it's standing upright. It's got like a hunched figure to it. And the most shocking thing of all was it had multiple sets of eyes. And I said, what did it do? And she said, we sat there aghast, just looking at it. And it just goes like this. And walks off over the other side of the road into the next field. She said, we're just like, what do? We can't turn around. We've got to drive past it. We've got to drive past it to turn around and go back home. She was absolutely terrified. So by the time she'd found her way to me, she was like 3 or 4 years into the fear. So I said to her, have you ever considered that maybe you've been carrying young? And she went, I don't know what you mean. I said, maybe it wasn't this multi-eyed monster. Maybe it was a creature of some kind that had been disturbed by the man that had walked into the woods with the dogs. Who said to pick up its young and go somewhere else.
Oh.
And it maybe had this hunch position because it's carrying something, you know? So that took a little bit of the fear out for her. And there is a funny side to this. She decided that she was going back in. She was going back into those woodlands if it killed her. So I said, put me on FaceTime. Yeah, and I'll come in with you, like, we'll do it by FaceTime. So the first time, after all this time, that she walks back into the British woodland, the minute she gets into the darkest bit, it thunders and lightnings. Like she was out of there like a shot. Yeah. So we had to work our way, but she ended up interviewing other witnesses in the area, just going round the town and speaking to them. She'd go to that lane and look for dog walkers and speak to them and ask them. She found out that there was a tunnel that went from the priory where they used to sneak any babies born to the nuns or anything forbidden would get sneaked out under those woods and into the town. So there's all of that connotation with it. And she has intrinsically set up her own paranormal group and has been looking. I think it's Leicestershire, isn't it? Swannington, if I remember rightly. So she's gone from being this absolutely terrified young mum through to, I'm not letting this beat me. It's really hard. And she didn't want to take the kid. I've been there. I've been that mum who didn't want to take the kids out. Don't want to take them in, you know, in case he's there or in case he sees me and comes and finds me. So she's like, her life's changed so much in the past 8 years. It's amazing to see. I'm just going to get a drink of water. I won't be a sec.
Yeah, sure. I think, Jonathan, that just shows you the value of full investigation with things, doesn't it? That was so interesting what Debbie said. It could have been carrying its young rather than have multiple eyes.
That's right. One of the things that struck me is the statement when we start referring to schizophrenia and hearing voices. And people throughout history have heard voices.
Yeah.
Now, we can't say that everybody was schizophrenic and they have a mental defect. You go into scripture and there's the prophets that had voices come to them saying, this is the word of God, or, you know, for us, the creator. And the thing is that in scripture, there was a very set rule that said, if you're going to call yourself a prophet, you have to be correct 100% of the time. If you're not correct, you're going to be killed. You know, if you just miss one, you know, you can't have a 99% you know, success rate, and then oops, I guess I missed that one. You were stoned. And so, you know, we do have references in history to people that have heard disembodied voices talking to them. And we have to understand that historically, a lot of religions, and I'm talking about organized religions, I'm not talking about faith, were created to control people.
Right.
And they controlled them even through intimidation. You could be tortured and killed for not believing what they said to believe. You know, you were punished in some way. And so we see this through history. Native Americans had a faith in the Creator, but it was not organized. It was almost organic.
And
And
no, yeah.
so we always run into that. People say, you know, well, if you hear voices, we tend to view things in a framework of what we've learned.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will say, well, it's a demon or it's an angel. You know, how do you tell? Is it something malevolent? Is it something that's trying to help? When you start thinking in terms of dimensional creatures and other things, we think the evidence seems to point to a dimension as being, you know, we look at it as these walls that you go through on one side or to the other. We think of it more as a cloud that is weaving back and forth, and every now and then something can slip through and slip back, given the proper deal. When Stan and I first started speaking back in 2011, if you were into Bigfoot, you didn't speak about anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
If you were talking about UFOs, you never brought up Bigfoot and you never brought up ghosts. And the evidence seemed to point to us that all these things are interrelated
Connections.
through through these dimension idea of either 12 or an infinite number of other dimensions at other frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And it accounts for a lot. And as proof of that, later on, CERN decided that they were going to do an experiment at the Hadron Collider to open a dimensional gate and send a message through. Bigfoot has been known for years among natives to be a dimensional creature that has actually been seen to disappear uh, while they were looking at it.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that up. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers with
No,
people
you're correct.
who are
So,
very religious, but it makes sense that we do get communicated with in some ways.
so there's when I go into like deep meditation, I can see if anybody's familiar with Metatron's cube. So as I close my eyes and go into meditation zone, I see all of the walls of atoms of Metatron's cube stacked together like walls between walls. But in between the Metatron's cube is an empty space, and in that empty space can exist infinite amount of potentials, plus doorways, realities, and so on. So as I'm perceiving it from my own experiences, it's like atoms of just walls and walls of these different atoms of the geometry of flower of life. But within these empty spaces, that's where the infinite potentials can be, and the portals can open up, and so forth. So that's just the way I see it. It's really cool how everyone sees it in their own different way.
For me, it's the quantum. I call it the quantum world because I can't tune into it. It's not. I think people think I can just sit down and tune into it like it's a switchboard. I can't. I can turn it on and off when it's too much, but even then, if something wants to come through, it will find a way of coming through. And it used to frighten me. So even as a child, when I'd hear something or I'd know something, it was scary. So it kind of always had that scary connotation to it. But that's it isn't there anymore. So now, if it was something annoying me, I would say no, not now. Like I'm really busy, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just find a way to live with it, and then if you just accept that you're not ever going to know everything. As human beings, we feel that we're supposed to know everything. When they throw at me how can people hear things, I always say to them, how did we communicate before speech? We didn't have speech for thousands and thousands of years. How did we communicate? You know when your partner's upset, you know when your children are ill, you know when you walk into a room and there's someone not right in that room. We know it, we sense it, we feel it, and we've just been taught to mistrust that.
Yeah.
That's you're anxious, something wrong with you. Yeah, I got that all the time. And then I find out weeks or months later or years later that person really was an awful person. And my judgment was right. It wasn't me who was being rude or impolite.
Yeah.
It was my intuition, and I was correct. And I just learned to. People say, "How do you do it?" Well, I don't know. I just trust it.
Yeah.
I trust it the same way that I trust that my legs are going to hold me. It's just I never did. I always thought I was crackers, but now I know I'm not crackers. I just trust it. I don't argue with it anymore.
Well,
That's
Deborah,
brilliant.
go ahead,
Michelle.
Sarah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say we've been taught to replace our inner tuition with the outer tuition of others. And that's part of the whole Indigenous thing, isn't it? They use their inner tuition, just this the other senses, to know what's going on.
If a deer's in the woodland and it hears the snap of a twig, it doesn't think, what was that? It hears the snap of the twig and it reacts and it moves. It doesn't question. And it doesn't. We kind of like reason everything away.
Yes.
So we do. It's like we reason everything away so that we fit into this impossible thing that we're supposed to fit into. It can be very freeing when you realise that actually it doesn't matter what you've got in your home or what car you drive or any of that. That's just a small amount of the big massive thing that your energy can do if you really worked on that. I mean, imagine things we could do if we, as a human species, we realised that we could interconnect that well.
Yes.
Deborah, I think it's a context of language. Like you were saying, we had an instinct for premonitions or seeing visions or being taken to the next dimension or over the veil, as some people say, from a religious context. I think we have put language to for our understanding of what this phenomena, and we as Native Americans lived in that reality a long time, and you're very in tune. Laura's in tune. Gail's in tune. Jonathan is in tune. But Native Americans have kept with
Yeah.
that aspect of themselves, whether it's our DNA. But I also think that we were taught through oral history that we were not supposed to forget
Yeah.
our ancestors. We are not supposed to forget our ways. And so language can be very damaging if we do not, like in the new age world, and I'm going to say this, we put things relating to other things which may not even be that. We just have to, our mind, we need to have that conception of understanding. And
Yeah.
so, Jonathan said it best with the labels of schizophrenia, and we have with these directional voices coming our way for wisdom, for power, so that we are empowered within ourselves and doing what our DNA is actually asking us to do.
Mm. I very big into my DNA only recently. I didn't really know much about my parents' families. I knew one set of grandparents, but that was it really. I didn't know anything. And when my dad was kind of abandoned as a child when he was about 7, I never wanted to upset him and go digging into it or anything like that. So when he passed away in 2018, I thought now's the time. I'll do a DNA test. Because I'm clearly just English, nothing more, just English. There's nothing more to me. And I couldn't have been any further wrong. I'm actually Irish, Welsh, with a tiny little bit of English in me. And I started to look at just going back. I wanted to know about the females in my life. Like my mum was an incredibly powerful woman, as was my grandmother, and I wanted to know where that had come from. And I started to realise that a lot of them were being put into like institutions because they were talking with spirit or they were having delusions or all of this. So I trace it, Laura, all the way back to the Calm Money Witch. Her name was Aunt Mary Butters. And she's like my aunt so many times removed. And she was almost hung in Ireland because she prophesied when beasts were going to die. So she would say to people, your animals are going to get sick next week. You need to do something about it. And when they got sick, it was like, that's her fault.
Yes.
She's done.
Blame.
4 months ago, I'm working a case that's on the Sussex border. So modern times with a lady probably about my age. And I start talking to her about things that she remembers from a child. And she said, when I was younger, I knew that all the pigs were going to get sick. And I told people, and they obviously looked at me like I had 2 heads. And I thought, that's a difference of 300 years. So back then, we got a witch. And now I say to her, well, you were clearly right. You picked up on it and you were absolutely right. And then I said to her, do animals find you when they're sick and ill? And she went, actually, yeah, they do. She said, I even have an owl that I found on the path in front of me, Merlin, and she's brought him up from being a baby. And I said, that's why what you see is canine. She always, whatever she sees, it always appears in a canine sense to her. Yeah. I said, right, that makes perfect sense to me now.
Yeah.
She saw something as it was walking down a track and she was going that way. And it looked a shock to see her as she was to see it. So that similar thing again. And she said it looked, Stan, it didn't vanish. It looked like it was pulled backwards somehow. Like when you do a sketch and you use the rubber to get rid of the sketch, that was almost how he vanished. And she said he looked at her, looked incredibly shocked, and poof, he'd gone. You know, he was kind of, but her family have lived on that land for generations. So mum saw something. I asked her if her mum had. She said, my mum wouldn't walk the woods. And I said, why? And she said, well, once she seen something up a tree and it really scared her. But there was another time when she saw something walking through the woodland. And after that, she wouldn't go in unless it was winter and there was no leaves on the trees. That's to show she could see in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but once you ask one person a question, all these stories come out of them. And if we were recording them doing what we're doing now, they'd just be forgotten.
So
Exactly.
what I'd recommend to do is something I've done before is when someone comes to you with a story about the paranormal, test the heart rate, test the blood pressure pre when they're about to tell you to after they've told you, test the heart rate and test the blood pressure. Because what I found is people have this suppression inside themselves and they suppress themselves for so long by not speaking their own truth, by not speaking their oral traditions of themselves. When they come to see you, it's like you're a therapist, even though you're doing many different things and experiencing. You are a therapist in a way because people can let off all of the things they've been holding on to. And spiritually, for people, it can turn into diseases. When someone holds on to something they want to speak about all their life, it can manifest. So it's like that release, isn't it? You know, when you tell someone a story like, oh my God, I finally said it and it's off my
Yeah,
chest.
it's not as
Yeah.
bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Usually that was not as bad as I thought it would be. Some people, it's like pulling teeth. I'll get a little bit out of them and they'll go away for a number of months or years and then they'll come back and they'll tell me more. And I think they're testing the water with me because honestly, they're trusting a stranger with some of their scariest moments. Or we find it really hard to show weakness as human beings, and weakness is just as needed as strongness is. We have to be a balance of things. So once I start to teach people that, and I say, you can look at it in several ways. One being that your glasses are full or your glasses are empty. But I'm the type of person who's really, really grateful that I've got a glass and there's something in it. So for most things, I can find a positive. So I can try and get them to stop looking at that, the bit that really frightens them, like break that experience down to what actually happened. The bit that frightened you was the fear that society put in you. And it is also a natural reaction that you cannot control when confronted by something terrifying. So any words that you have put on yourself because of that, let that go. Because it's the same as walking outside your house tomorrow and seeing a lion. You don't think what you're going to do, you just react, you know. So taking that from them can be really helpful. And just saying, you know, I say to them all the time, I don't know if I'll ever get answers, but I love the fact that we can have a conversation about it. I just want to normalize it so that in 10, 15 years time, people are talking about it in the pub or at the gym or, you know, out with the friends or when they're shopping, you know, just make normalize the hell out of it. Because the number of cases I work with children, most children being the ages of like 2 when they can start to communicate what they're seeing and they're seeing things in their room or on them home, I will jump them right to the top of the list. Because I know that if I can put the control in either mum or dad's hands, everything's going to be fine. It's just, I need to teach them how to say, not in this house. No, you're not scaring him. Once I can kind of give them that, I tend to find that they'd already thought of it anyway. But they were just wanting my permission to carry it out. You know, and I say to them, no, you come to that intuitively on your own. You know, you should give yourself a good mark for that. You know, don't be thinking it's silly. If you think, I'm going to give my son a torch, and every time he's frightened, he's going to shine that torch. That's his power, that little torch, stars, hammer. And I don't know why I didn't do it, Debbie. And I said, because you're waiting for society to give you permission. Whatever comes to you intuitively, do it. Some will say, I was thinking about decorating the room, and I say, do it. Whatever you think about, do it. It's a positive move forward. You put control in your hand and then you can move forward with that event. And all I ever ask them, and I ask everybody this, and they'll say, what do you want me to pay? I say, I don't want you to pay me anything. But the next time you meet a person that's going through what you're going through, tell them what I told you. You know, we'll just keep spreading it like that, and eventually everybody will get it.
Well, it's taking some of the scary woo-woo out of it. And if they actually just brushed on a bit of quantum science in schools, just a little bit, so that these other dimensions were sort of explainable in a way to children, then when they were having experiences, they would realize they're, as we were saying earlier, that they're sort of going in and out of the quantum field. They're accessing a quantum field. whatever it is you're seeing, although you're saying, yes, it can be frightening, I get that. But either, that another being like a Bigfoot has come through to this dimension, or maybe we're in their dimension, we're accessing a quantum field. And explain some of the quantum physics to them,
Yeah,
because that's what brings the woo-woo-ness and the science together and takes the woo-woo out of the woo-woo,
yeah,
doesn't
I
it?
get what you
It
mean.
takes the fear out of the woo-woo, that you can actually have paranormal experiences. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing, as you were saying, people will be talking about it down the pub and saying, well, I accessed the quantum field tonight.
and,
I've
and
all been
I
like,
saw this.
and that's why spiritual hygiene is so important, to teach that to the children, about them
Yes,
regularly clearing out the space, putting love essence into it, prayer of happiness into the house, so the child knows
discernment.
that it has an inner knowing and a potential to be themselves, instead of always looking to this horror film or someone who had a negative experience. We create our own reality, and if we have self-awareness, know thyself, and know who we are. We're a balanced person. We're in the body. We're not overthinking all the time from being out there. It gives us an awareness to be balanced and not scared. And like obviously the Paranormal Rangers and Laura and so on, that fear kind of disappears because it becomes more of a normal reality. There's less, like Laura said, the woo-woo all the time. And the more we talk about this, the more normal it becomes. Because we all have paranormal experiences, even if we don't admit it or not. We dream.
Yeah.
That's a paranormal experience. Every night we go out there.
I have a 10-year-old grandson, and people will say to me, what do your grandchildren think about what you do? They don't know anything else because I've done it their entire lives.
Yeah.
Same as with my daughters. So one of my daughters is still running away from the responsibility of it because she sees the dark things like me. So she will come to her own in her own time when it's meant to happen. My youngest daughter's 27, took to it like a duck to water, not a problem from being a child, just very, very easy. My granddaughter is kind of a mixture of all of us, but she's something that she does privately, not because she's ashamed of it, because it's hers, and she chooses to do what she wants with it. And then my 10-year-old grandson, he takes sighting reports from his friends. If they've seen a UFO or if Grandad's seen a ghost, he will literally sit down with his iPhone and get them to talk on tape and do what I do about the experience.
Wow.
So that's how far it's come. It's a few generations, and it's took a bloody long time coming. If my parents had said to me at the time, Laura, we don't know what you saw, Deb, and we don't know why we saw it, but we believe you, that would have made such a massive difference to me.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a homeless man. You're just being silly. It was a drunk.
Mm.
I was a fool, a liar, or out for attention was basically, I fell somewhere within that pie chart. You don't spend 42 years of your life doing what I do, 16, 18 hours a day, for something you've made up in your head for attention. I must have been really good at planning up front, you know.
Before we do finish up, so Debbie had a recent interview with the Guardian newspaper. So Dale, do you just want to share some of that, if that's okay? Just so if you can share it on screen.
It was for, as they call monster hunters, but they used the word monster very loosely. So it was a lady that does paranormal investigations. It was a chap that does UFO investigations, myself and another person. And to be in the Guardian in the UK is massive anyway. It's a huge thing. It's not what we would call tabloid. And they were asking me what I did as a job. And one of the things that they didn't put in the article, because obviously they start with a huge article and they cut it right down so it's really small. And it was a byline and I really liked it. And it said that Deborah had gone from being terrified of things as a child to counselling children in their bedroom and old men in palliative care. And I thought, that sums it up in a nutshell. That's exactly what I do. You know, and that's one of the places on Winter Hill that my dog refuses to go into. And that's where they wanted to take the photographs. And we'll just take you into the haunted wood, Deborah, and take a photograph of you there. Right, okay.